we have not met before, and we are wrapping up our series called Jump. And we've been talking about what faith is, and faith is just, figuring everything out, but it still comes down to, in your relationship with God, it still comes down to this jump, and that jump is faith. And what we're going to do today is we're going to recap everything we talked about for the last 4 weeks. And if you've been coming for the last 4 weeks, you're like, oh no, we're going to do this again. But it's going to be really good because it's so important that we just kind of reinforce this and reiterate this and drive this home, because defining faith is so important, because it's incredibly hard to have more of something, right, that you don't know what it is. Okay, so we're just reinforcing the definition of what faith is. So I'm just going to give you a quick recap of everything we talked about in this faith series. So the first week we asked this question: what is faith? Right? Because definitions vary all the time, and we always have a tendency to be off by just a little bit. So what is faith? And the simple answer, love what the Bible does, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, super, super simple definition. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for. Right? So you know what it's like to hope. Faith is like a step before that. Faith is a step beyond that. Faith is going, not only do I hope for this, but I'm confident in the thing that I hope for. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Okay, now keep that in mind for later in the message, okay? It's confidence in something that we do not see. Hold that in check, remember that for later. And what we've been saying is just simply this: practically, faith, for somebody that is living out faith practically, they're just a person that's asking one question: what does God want? Not what makes me feel safe, not what I've experienced before, not any of that. What does God want? And I will do it regardless. Now, to illustrate this, of course, the best way to do it is with a movie. We're going to do something now, and we're just going to hope that we don't burst into flames, okay? We're going to show a clip from Harry Potter, okay? So this is a good example of faith. Let's take a look at this clip.
All right, Percy. You first. Fred, you next.
He's not Fred, I am. Honestly, woman, you call yourself our mother.
Oh, I'm sorry, George.
I'm only joking. I am Fred.
Excuse me. Could you tell me how to get onto the platform? Yes, not to worry, dear. It's Ron's first time to Hogwarts as well. Now, all you've got to do is walk straight at the wall between platforms 9 and 10. Best do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous. Good luck.
So that is just like a perfect example of what faith is, because it's God asking us to do something that we've never experienced before. We've maybe seen it modeled, we've seen other people do it, but we haven't ourselves done it, and we have to really build ourselves up for it. And faith is taking that jump or taking that step to actually get through it. And here's the thing, that's why we showed the clip. Because then when you get through on the other side, when you take that step of faith and you go through it, you get done and you're like, oh man, that's it? That's all it was? I can promise you almost every step of faith that you take, it's going to be risky, right? It's going to be something that kind of goes against everything you kind of thought before. But if you take that step of faith, on the other side of it, you're going, that's it? That's all? This makes so much sense. Why wouldn't I do something like this? So that's the definition of faith. The second week, what we talked about, and this was a big week for a lot of you, we talked about this: why does God require faith? In other words, why doesn't Jesus just show up in my room every morning with a cup of coffee and a scone? Wouldn't that make life so much easier, right? Wouldn't that make our faith easier if we could just see God at work? And here's what we said about that. Seeing God doesn't really work. You think if God just kind of showed up more, that it would make it easier, it would make it, way easier to follow him. But it doesn't really work like that. We talked about that week, we talked about Moses, and we talked about the Israelites, and God leading his people and doing just incredible, extraordinary things, parting the Red Sea and leading his people and doing miracles all the time. And then God leaves them alone for just a couple of days. And they immediately turn from God and they start worshiping false idols. And you think it's going to help, but seeing God really wouldn't change the dynamic of the relationship any more than it changes the dynamic of any relationship you have with anybody on earth that you can see. Seeing God doesn't really work. And then last week, this was probably the easiest one for us to answer. How do I get faith? Right? So, okay, I kind of understand what it is, and I want to have it. How do I get it? And we just simply said this. Faith comes from hearing the Word. In Romans chapter 10, verse 17, it's just this beautiful thing. It explains exactly how you get it. Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the Word about Christ. And growing in our faith, whether it's a first-time decision or whether we've had faith for a long time and we just want more of it, growth in Christ and developing more faith is this process of hearing and responding. I was thinking about this yesterday when I was looking at my Bible app. I've got the Bible app we love everybody to have. It's just a free app, and I was looking at the verse of the day. Okay, this was yesterday's verse of the day. It just pops up. And the verse of the day was in Luke chapter 6. And it just simply said that, be good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you. Be good to people who hate you, bless those who curse you. How many people saw that on yesterday's Bible app version? A few of you did. That was there, popped up. That's one of those verses that always just kind of like sticks in your craw, and you're just kind of like, oh. Now, when you hear that passage, there's basically, generally speaking, there's three groups of people. The first group of people is people that don't have faith. Right? This is a good process for us to learn, like how you get faith. The first group of people look at it and go, you know what? I'm not sure that's going to work. And I'm not sure, like, if I bless somebody that's cursed me, right? If I'm good to people who are hateful to me, what does that teach them, right? What does that teach them? And so you look at it and you go, yeah, I mean, that's good stuff. It doesn't really apply to my situation. I don't really buy that. That's a person that doesn't have faith. They heard, but there was no response. The second group of people are look at verses like that. Second group of people, they look at it and they've got a little bit of faith. Right? This is a group of people that hear that or read that and they see it on their Bible app and they're just like, yeah, that's right. That's the right thing to do. That's the right thing to say. Yeah. And if somebody comes to them for advice, they might even pull out that verse and say, yeah, you're supposed to bless those who curse you, and you're supposed to be kind to those who are hateful to you. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. But they've only got a little bit of faith. And so they believe it, but they don't actually do it. The verse goes one step farther. It says, pray for those who persecute you. Right? Pray for people that are being mean to you. And, we get probably somebody in this second group where you're going, yeah, that's the right thing to do. But have you had enough faith to actually do it? To actually pray for somebody? To have enough compassion, enough love for somebody that would just soon you die? Who's done horrible things or hateful things to you? Have you actually taken that step of faith to actually do it? And then the third group of people, this is kind of an elite group. There's a group of people like in this room. When you hear that verse, you pulled it up on your Bible app. You went, yeah, be kind to people who are hate me. Bless those who curse me. Pray for them. And you go, yeah, I don't really want to do that. I'm not really sure it's going to work, but I got to trust God, right? I got to believe that every single thing He tells me is right. So I'm going to do it. That's what it means to have faith. It's very simple how somebody has faith. You hear and you respond. Now, that's what faith is. We spent the last 3 weeks kind of defining it and describing it and talking about exactly what it is. And we could talk a lot more Like every story in the Bible, Genesis through Revelation, every story in the Bible has something to do with faith. I mean, the Bible is a book about faith. So we can talk on and on and on. I can tell you many, many more stories, but we want to just kind of say, that's it. That's what faith is. That's what it means to have faith. So we want to ask one more question. And this isn't a question that we're going to answer. This is a question that we want you to answer. And the simple question is, now that we know what faith is, what are you waiting for? Right? What are you waiting for? And I don't mean that as an obnoxious question, like, what are you waiting for? Just do it, do it, do it! I don't mean it like that. I mean a very sincere question, like, what are you waiting for? What's that thing that's keeping you from God? Now listen, maybe the most important thing I say today, you owe it to yourself to be able to answer that question. You owe it to yourself to be able to very, very comprehensively be able to answer the question of what is keeping me from the jump. Now, as I just said that and I'm talking about it, I know there's a lot of people in here who've been going to church for a while, and you're just like, yeah, this is good, this is good, it's good for all the visitors that are coming and new people to church, and this is a good thing for them, right? And by all means, I totally mean that. If you've maybe never taken that first step, or you think the jump is probably the right move, you've seen other people do it, you've seen it change their life, you're wanting to take that jump, whatever it is, of faith, but you're waiting on something. Some of you are waiting on God. You're like, yeah, I mean, I know this is the right thing to do, this is the right direction to go in, but I'm gonna just wait until God makes me. Right? And as soon as He makes me, then I'm gonna go ahead and do it, right? A lot of you are waiting for God to speak to you more. To just for that right moment. It's to me it's kinda like when you fall in love. Right? That's the big thing, right? If you watch a Twilight movie, you fall in love, and there's this moment where well, I don't know if I love him, I don't know if I don't love him, or I don't know if I should say I love you again. It's just like that whole process to me is just a whole other sermon, but stupid. Anyway, there's this kind of line that you're trying to cross, and I'm just waiting for that moment for God to really do something or speak or say something. Some of you, you're waiting on God. You're waiting for a crisis, right? You're like, I'm here, I'm ready to jump, and but I don't know if I'm quite ready. I'm just going to wait till I really have to, right? As soon as one of my kids get leukemia, I'm ready to jump, right? As soon as the finances go, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a jump. You're waiting for a crisis to take the jump. You're waiting for God to move the events in your life to this inevitable place where the only thing you can do is jump. And here's the truth about that. That God's on the other side of this invisible curtain. We're standing here getting ready to jump. God's on the other side of this invisible curtain going, just do it. Come on. I gave you everything I'm going to give you. It's obvious from the world around you. I've been working in your life from day one. It's there. I'm giving you everything I'm going to give you. Just do it. Just make that jump. And again, whether you first time in church or been around for a long time, whatever that faith step is, whatever's holding you back, I just want to tell you, God's waiting on you. You shouldn't be waiting on God. God's waiting on you to have greater faith. So that's the big question, and I want you to think about that question. What's keeping you from that jump? What's keeping you from doing that? Making that decision, from going all in, from doing that. Think about that question during the service. And as we think about that question, I want to give a warning, a caution. Just a few cautions of things that they look like faith, and sometimes they're kind of like faith, but they're not real faith. Just want to give you a couple. The first one is this is the big one. Don't settle, as you're thinking about making a decision of faith, whatever it is, don't settle for circumstantial faith. Here's what circumstantial faith is. We hinge our strength or the weakness of our faith And I say faith because this isn't really faith, but we hinge the strength or weakness of our faith on our ability to be able to perceive God in our life. Right? We hinge our faith, or the strength or weakness of our faith, on our ability to perceive God in our life. Just black and white example. Like that high school kid. Right? That high school kid that has a relationship with God, and he goes to church, and he goes to the CIY events in the summer, and he's got youth group, and he has this relationship with God. And within his context, he does A, B, and C, and he can see God like crazy. And so at that point, man, reading the Bible, going to church, following God, that's like a piece of cake. Living obediently in his life, it's at hard at times, but it's easy because he can perceive what God's doing in their life. And then all of a sudden, what happens? That kid graduates, and he goes to college. Right? Big gulp moment for every parent when their child goes to college. And all of a sudden, they're in a different context, right? They're in a different world, and they had high hopes about like getting plugged in with the right kind of people and everything, but all of a sudden there's people with a different set of world values, and it started to get really kind of hard, and all of a sudden they're doing A, B, and C just like they did over there, but they're not really seeing God. They're not perceiving God. And all of a sudden their faith gets weak, and it gets really, really hard to follow and read the Bible and go to church and finding Christian friends and doing all that kind of stuff and being obedient, living faithfully. It's really, really difficult because faith is based on circumstances. It's circumstantial faith. And I would bet that almost everybody in here has had that experience where you got kind of excited. Almost every Christian I've ever known, they've kind of been at this spot where, man, following God was easy, and they could perceive God, and they could see God, and they were just like close to God. And it was like really not that hard. Church, Bible, living for Him, being obedient, faithfulness, man, because they could perceive. And then all of a sudden, something happens. The context change. Your kids grow into teenagers. That's a big context change, right? Your life changes a big way. You get relocated. You get a different job. You have a relationship, and that relationship ends or it changes, and all of a sudden the context is different. And seeing God or perceiving where God is gets really, really hard. And so now all of a sudden you struggle in your, again, quote unquote faith, because it's not real faith. You struggle in your faith because the context changed. That's circumstantial faith. That's not real faith. And let me tell you why this doesn't work. Because our ability to perceive our context is really bad. We have a really poor ability to perceive God in our context, right? Because we, number one, we never give God enough time, right? Well, God, I asked for this on Tuesday, and I'll give you till Monday, next week. And maybe if you're really, really faithful, you give them like 2 weeks, right? So we never give God enough time. We're like, God isn't working, it's been 2 weeks. Also, our ability to perceive God is just like my kids. If you were to jump into my life as a parent, and you were to like see me interacting with my kids, there might be times where my kids would definitely not perceive me as being very present, very close, being a very good father. For instance, like when we discipline them, or when we take them to the dentist, right? Think about what we do with our children. We take them into the dentist's office, we crack open their mouth, the guy starts drilling away, and we leave the room, right? And from the kid's perspective, it's like, well, you don't love me. You weren't very close to me at the time. We're terrible at perceiving, just like our kids are perceiving, and the very thing that is supposed to be an act of love from me as a father, our children perceive as an act of not love, or as a we being far away. And so at the same time, we're that way too. The context for that high schooler went from high school and went to college, nothing changed with God. God remains faithful, God remains consistent, God remains the same. But it's his perception. Now, remember what I said, we've got to remember Hebrews 11:1. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. It is being certain of. It's being certain of what we do not see. That's what faith is. It's being certain of what we do not see. Our faith can't be based on our circumstances. That's not real faith. Okay, the second one looks like this. Don't settle for emotional faith. Don't settle for emotional faith. And all I mean by that is there are times where we just kind of feel that relationship, right? You know that time, if you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, or whatever, you know that time where that relationship was just cake. Whether it was an appropriate relationship or not, it was cake, because it was just like you were in love and everything was good, and maybe you were on a cruise or whatever, and then there's that kind of period that's kind of the real world, and all of a sudden it gets different, and you kind of have these ups and downs. That's what our faith comes down to with God. Sometimes it's very emotional based, and we get excited about something. I had this kid one time, he came up to me at church I was at in Missouri, and he came up, he's a high school kid, and he said, I'm ready to follow Jesus. I want to get baptized. I want to start reading my Bible. I want to be in the band. I want to just do everything. And I believed it. It was a sincere decision. We baptized him, and it was great. And then that week, a revival speaker came into town at another church. Now, if you've never been to a revival, basically what a revival speaker is like that Chris Farley, right, type guy that comes in and says everything that I say every week, except he says it like this, and that's kind of what a revival speaker is. Anyway, so he kind of gets people to come in and works people up in this lathers them up into this moment, and then he does this big altar call where he tries to get people to make a decision based on how loud he is and stuff. And so he's doing this thing, and I see I'm there supporting it. It was good, and people are moving forward. I'm like, that's great. And then all of a sudden, this kid I baptized just that past Sunday walks by, up there to the front. And I was like, well, shoot, I guess what I did didn't take, or whatever. he goes up to the front, and they pray over him and stuff, and he receives Jesus again. And then after it was all over, I just kind of came up to him. I'm like, hey, so, why'd you go up there? And he's like, I don't know. He said if you love Jesus, or if you wanted to love Jesus, you should come forward. And so, I didn't, who wouldn't go forward, And I was just, that's kind of that moment where we get to this place where we get this emotional connection, and that's kind of our faith. And those moments are cool, and those moments are very powerful, and sometimes they change our life forever, but real faith is much, much deeper than that, because let me tell you, your emotional status, your emotional relationship with God is going to go like this. And if it's your faith, then your faith is going to go like this. Real faith, deeper. It's a stronger anchor. It's something more than that. Don't settle for emotional faith. Third one, don't settle for a faith event. All I mean by that is a lot of times we like to look at faith like this kind of one-time isolated thing, like maybe it was that time where somebody prayed with you, or maybe it was your baptism, or maybe it was a mission trip that you went on, and you look kind of, and you're like, yeah, I had faith in that moment, and I have that. Now you can identify yourself with that kind of moment. Faith's bigger than that. Faith is something that happens daily. It happens from decision to decision, choice to choice. Faith is a decision you make over and over and over again. Don't wait until your next missions trip. Right? Don't say, hey, well, I guess I need to be baptized again. It didn't take. Maybe I need to find a revival, right? Don't wait for that kind of event over and over again. That's not real faith. It's deeper than that. It's more daily than that. And fourth, really important, don't settle for lip service faith. Now, I think I have something in common with God, because God gets angry in the Bible. It's no secret. We're not trying to cover it up here, okay? God gets angry in the Bible. In fact, God has a whole other level of anger. God has wrath, right? So he's got his own description of his way over the top anger. And what's most important isn't so much that God gets angry, it's what he gets angry about. And the things that God gets consistently the most angry about are people who are kind of in the middle road. The people that kind of pay homage, or they give this lip service, but they don't really do now. This is why I think I have something in common with God. Because this is the same thing that irritates me with my children. There's always this moment, I've got the big ones and little ones, but my little ones, I always make them say, after they've fought or something, or done something wrong, I always make them say sorry to each other. And I hate that process. Because we get all done, and I'm like, okay, Nevaeh, say you're sorry to Josiah, and Josiah, then you'll say sorry to Nevaeh. And so start Nevaeh. She's like, okay. say it so he can hear it and mean it. Say it loud and say it right now. I'm sorry! Right? It's just great. That was beautiful. Okay. Now let's move to Josiah. Josiah, can you do better than that? Right? So it becomes a game of who can be more sincere in their apology. So I'm like, can you do better than that, Josiah? And he's like, right? I'm like, teaching eye contact to a child is very, very difficult. I'm like, no, you look at her in the eyes. You say, you're sorry. And I know he's not looking at her eyes. I can't prove it. He's looking at her forehead or something. He's just like making him like, okay, come on, do it. He's like, oh my gosh, there's nothing that irritates me more. And so they're saying sorry, right? They're just doing the lip service thing. That's the thing that kind of really makes God angry at anything. Is when you say, yeah, I follow God, I'm a believer, and then you don't back it up with any of your life. God actually has a term for that. It says, don't mock. He gets more irritated at people that kind of go halfway as the people that are very, very authentic or the people that are just completely far away from him. God's like, don't mock me. Don't pay lip service. I want to read a verse from James 2:17. There's a whole lot to this passage. If you're looking for something to read or a place to start in Scripture, read the book of James. It's just beautiful. It's super practical. A lot in James chapter 2 about this subject. But I just want to read this one excerpt. He says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Faith by itself, if it's not accompanied with action, is dead. Not because it requires you to like measure up or have these good works or whatever, but it's because how sincere can your faith really be if it isn't accompanied with some sort of response? Remember, faith is about hearing and responding. So don't just look the part on the outside. Don't just learn the lingo. Don't just act like you've taken a step of faith. It's really important that this faith be completely sincere. It's just like, I can't turn to my wife and say, man, I love you, and then go to the strip club. It just doesn't work like that. It doesn't matter how many times I say I love her or how passionately I say it. It doesn't matter if I don't back that up with action. Okay? So those are just some things that we kind of caution and we warn about as you're thinking about like what's keeping you, like where you're at, what's keeping you from making the jump or making that decision. And as you're thinking about that, I want to talk about like the deeper faith. And I want to anchor that to a verse. In the book of Hebrews, there's a verse that describes that deeper faith. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14, it says, therefore, since we have a great high priest now, this is written to a group of people, that when they were told about Jesus, they were told that Jesus is going to come back anytime. And they didn't perceive that, right? They didn't perceive it in their context. They didn't perceive that as like a couple thousand years from now. They didn't perceive it like next year. It was kind of like, don't sit down because Jesus is coming back, right? So they were like, this is great. Like I gave my life to the Lord and now Jesus is going to come back. And then time went by and they're kind of waiting this thing out. And now they're looking in their context and they're going, I don't see God. I don't see God doing this thing. And because of that, a lot of persecution broke out. And this persecution didn't just affect a small part of their life, it was like everything. It affected their family relationships, these people that had the same kind of faith, it affected that. It even got deeper than that. They had these basically what we would call a union, okay? And these unions a lot of times were based on the person that you worshipped, the God that you worshipped. That was what kind of made you a union. So can you imagine what it would be like for you to say, yeah, in order for me to follow Jesus as a school teacher or whatever, I have to not be a part of that union, right? That would be big. That would affect a big part of your life. And that's what it was. It was affecting every part of their life. And there was a lot of persecution, and it was getting very difficult. And they were in a place where they were having a hard time perceiving God in their context. And the writer of Hebrews comes along with this encouragement. He says, no, faith's more than that. It's not just your context. It's not where you see God in your life. It's this. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God. He spent all this time talking about how so basically Jesus is between us and God. He is our priest. He's like speaking to God on our behalf and making up for our sins and our shortcomings. He says, because we have this kind of high priest, Jesus, the Son of God, let us, and this is real faith, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. Despite what's going on, despite what you see, despite what the roller coaster of life, hold firmly the faith we profess. A lot of times we perceive that our faith is at its best when we're excited about it. But faith is actually the opposite of that. Faith is at its strongest when you're not excited about it, when it's difficult, when it's hard, when it's not based on your mood. It is the strongest when you're living it out despite the circumstances and despite how you feel. Hold firmly to the faith that you profess. That's real faith. Now, back to our question. What are you waiting for? Have you been thinking about it? What are you waiting for? What are the obstacles? What's keeping you from it? Again, I would come back to this, that God's probably given you everything He's going to give you. He's giving you all the incentive, all the encouragement, everything. God can be clearly seen all around you. It just comes down to He's just sitting on the other side of that invisible curtain going, come on. What has to happen in your life? Just do it. Do it. I gave you everything. Just make the jump. I want to read you again from Hebrews, within the context of the Hebrews. I want to read you Hebrews chapter 3. This is what the writer says to this church. We have come to share in Christ if, indeed, we hold our original conviction firmly to the very end. So he reinforces what we just read before. If you hold it firmly to the very end. As has just been said. And then he quotes from the Old Testament from a story that happened about 1,500 years ago. So he's bringing all these Hebrews and saying, hey, remember your Hebrew culture? Okay, remember what happened in that context? He says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. Now, let me explain what the rebellion is, and then I want to circle back to that verse. The rebellion was that time where God led his people out of Egypt, parted the Red Sea, all kinds of signs and miracles and manna from heaven, and just God everywhere. And God took them through a long process all the way to the edge of the land of the Promised Land. A land that described, it was just a beautiful place. It was flowing with milk and honey. I don't know why that's a good thing, but apparently that's a good thing in their culture. Okay, so Snickers bars and Coke, right? It's just, that's not that kind of Coke, but that's the kind of land, that's the kind of land they were excited about. Whatever it was a good place. And God led them all the way over to basically the edge of paradise. And he's like, you guys have been living in the desert. You've been living in nasty old Egypt, and that's what you know. And I want to bring you to the land of Canaan, okay? And it is a beautiful place. So they send some scouts over there, and they go over to the Promised Land, and they see these guys with these huge grapevines, and they see, the milk and the honey just flowing, and they see all this, and they go, it is a beautiful place. But they also see giants. They see tribes of seasoned warriors and advanced civilizations that have been around, and they're there, and they're not going to just give up their land. And so they come back and they're like, yeah, it looks good, but we don't want to do that. I mean, you brought us this far, but we have no guarantee that you're going to take it. So, no, God, we'd just like to turn down paradise, if that's okay. And they said no to God. It's beautiful. Beautiful imagery. Here God's giving them all you got to do is just take that step, follow, and I'll give you this. They're like, no, we don't. So listen to what God did. That was the rebellion. This is what God did. God took them out in the desert and they wandered around for 40 years. Why 40 years? Because 40 years is the age span of a generation. God took them out in the desert and they wandered around 40 years. God basically killed off all the people. He's like, all right, we'll just wait it out. And then they had kids, and then when that generation was grown up, they took that generation to the edge of the Promised Land again. He's like, okay, you want to do it? Right? Do you want to live in paradise? I didn't make your fathers, and I'm not going to make you. It's just, there it is. Do you want it, or do you not want it? And they made the decision to go into the Promised Land, and God gave them like the land flowing with milk and honey. And that's the situation, that's the story that each and every one of us have. No matter where we're at, first time at church, been coming to church for a long time, the decision for us to take that step and that jump and have more and more faith comes down to that. Do you want it? So let me circle back to the verse. This is for you right here, right now, today. If you hear his voice, because faith is hearing and responding, don't harden your heart. Because that's what this all comes down to. Don't harden your heart. Don't push away from God. Just if God wants it, here's how you have faith. You do it. Doesn't matter how hard it is. Doesn't matter whether it makes you feel uncomfortable. If it's the right thing to do, because God asked you to do it, just do it. I'm going to pray for you today, and let me pray very specifically that you would be able to answer that question authentically. What's keeping you from that relationship with God? What's keeping you from making that jump? And that you would be able to identify very specifically what it is. And if all it is that last little bit of doubt, if all it is your personal happiness or what you think is going to give you happiness, if it's a sense of security, I'm going to pray that God will help you be able to identify it. Let's pray.